facial recognition use by the DMV passed a bill to implement it during a closed session within a huge omnibus package containing a lot of other bills. There was no room for citizens to comment, and the bill passed within a short period of time. These are battles that are ongoing. There is time to fight back. In our research for the Who Has Your Face project, released a few months ago, we counted at least 27 states, you can see on the screen, where the FBI can search or request data from driver's license and ID databases. In June of last year, the Government Accountability Office reported only 21. That means 6 new states began offering data from their facial recognition databases to the FBI in the last year. This is an ongoing and changing battleground. Here are the DMVs that definitely have agreements to share FR database access in some way with local or state law enforcement. This means that even if agencies in these states are, for example, barred from using Clearview or recognition, often they can simply send a photo, a mugshot, a photo taken from a mobile device, a photo pulled from social media, directly to the DMV, who can run the images through their database. This isn't a comprehensive list, though. It's nearly impossible to know which agencies are sharing these photos and with whom. Each agency across the US, from state DMVs to the State Department, share access to their photos differently depending on agreements with local police, other states, and federal agencies. For the Who Has Your Face project, we submitted dozens of public records requests, but we were lucky enough to also use the data that Georgetown had found through its public records requests for its perpetual lineup project. Unfortunately, even with submitting public records requests, it can take years to compile the results, and you may not even get them. We were continuously thwarted in our research by non-responsive government agencies, by conflicting information between agencies, agreements that had been superseded by new agreements, and the generally covert and frankly opaque nature of these policies. This is a huge problem. It should be easy to learn who has your image for facial recognition purposes, but in fact, it's not. Some DMVs give the public the precise number of requests that they've been made for facial recognition. As an example here with Wisconsin, it received 238 requests in 2016. And there's a table on the screen of what kinds of crimes the requests were that were submitted. You'll see a cybercrime column here with 13 total cases, 13 photos submitted and 4 matched. Now, where did they get the photos for cybercrime to submit to Wisconsin's DMV database? Who knows? Another thing that you might see when you do a public records request for this kind of data is who made the requests and how many they made. A list of agency requests to Utah's DMV included Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, the Department of Homeland Security, various state fusion centers, state secret service agencies, and the United States Office of National Drug Control Policy. This list is 62 pages long. It starts in 2015 and goes to 2017. So there are hundreds and hundreds of agencies around the country that requested Utah's DMV do a facial recognition search for them. Even if some of the agencies send data like this, it's still impossible to know precisely which agencies are sharing which photos and with whom. Now, which federal agencies have facial recognition? Unfortunately, many of them. A lot of them have their own systems as well as tapping into these state databases. FBI, Department of Homeland Security, TSA, CBP, ICE, and the State Department all use facial recognition themselves. That means that when you get a passport, you get a visa, or you get TSA PreCheck, the photos you submit are going into a database that can be queried for not just the purposes of identification, but for facial recognition to determine whether you match, according to an algorithm, a photo submitted by the department or by someone else. We shouldn't be forced to submit to criminal face recognition searches merely because we want to drive a car, fly on an airplane, vote, or buy alcohol, but right now we are. Now, here's a snippet of an ad from Clearview AI showing the difference between the number of photos that Clearview has, 3 billion, and the number of photos that the FBI has access to, which is now 600 million or so, and was 411 million in this ad. You might ask, is it better at least if the states have access to these photos, which we submitted supposedly voluntarily, rather than private companies which scraped the information without our consent? Rather than think about which is better, we need to look closer at how face recognition works and why all law enforcement and government agency use of it should be banned. So let's just start with, what is face recognition? Face recognition systems use computer algorithms to pick out distinctive details and turn those into a numerical template called a face print. And that face print is essentially like a thumbprint. It gets matched to photos that get submitted to it. You might have heard that face rec is flawed, that the tool doesn't always match the correct image with the correct person. That's true, but that's not the only problem with face recognition. Even if face recognition matched photos 100% of the time, there would still be plenty of issues and plenty of dangers when the tool is used in the hands of law enforcement. I'll get into that more, but let me introduce my colleague, Matthew Gariglia. He is an expert in police tech and police surveillance.
The fact of the matter is that in the hands of an unaccountable criminal justice system, this tech is actually very dangerous. I find there are two main ways that face surveillance does harm to whoever encounters it. First are the very physical, legal, and financial harms that come with being misidentified. In January 2020, Robert Williams was arrested by the Detroit Police Department in his driveway in Farmington Hill, Michigan. Why was he arrested? He was arrested because after scanning a blurry security camera still, the DPD's algorithm spit out Mr. Williams' name as a plausible match. In Detroit, this seems to be a regular occurrence. Less than a year earlier, Michael Oliver was arrested after an algorithm identified him as an investigative lead, and an eyewitness chose him out of a lineup, despite the fact that there was almost no other corroborating evidence. Racial biased machines, like racially biased eyes, can misidentify people. And I say racially biased machines because the training data set is itself skewed toward identifying and therefore misidentifying black and brown suspects. If the data being fed into the software has been generated by a criminal justice system that over-polices, haphazardly arrests, and charges racial minorities, then the results will also skew in that direction because that is what has been collected.
But the system itself is broken too. Right now, police don't have to submit evidence when they've used facial recognition to identify a suspect most of the time. What that means is that suspects can be identified supposedly by an algorithm that they can't interrogate, and they don't know how many other people might have been matched through the algorithm. That makes it impossible for the accused to defend themselves and to have due process. And this isn't new. As Matthew explains, the Rogues Gallery has had this effect since its creation.
I'm going to take us back over a century, because I think this point really illustrates the fundamental problems of this technology. On the night of May 10th, 1899, gambler Doc Owens was arrested on suspicion after he was accused of cheating at cards. At the police station, he was photographed, his measurements were taken and retained by the New York City Police Department. Owens was let go because there was no warrant for his arrest and no real reason to keep him, but his photograph remained with the police. As one columnist in Chattanooga, Tennessee, who covered the story wrote, quote, "Once a photograph is hung in the gallery, there is no removing it. A policy of that kind is utterly indefensible. It is a cruel injustice and a constant bar to reform. Youthful indiscretion is put on the same plane as murder. It provides no loophole through which the victim may escape the dire results of criminal publicity. Nobody is going to employ a young man or young woman whose picture adorns the Rogues Gallery." End quote. Simply put, once people were found guilty or even deemed suspicious, the retention of data would ensure that it would remain that way forever. Their face would be searched, as it is now, over and over again, and compared to every subject. Every time someone else commits a crime, the faces of hundreds or thousands or now even millions of faces are searched over and over again for guilt. It forever erodes the presumption of innocence for anyone who has gotten a driver's license or has been arrested.
So the way police tend to use face recognition, just literally the way they use the tool, is also often dangerous. You might have heard of a story where a suspect, who you can see on the left here in the image, was captured on a surveillance camera. The camera's image wasn't very clear. It was blurry, and the image didn't show up with any significant confidence, any results through the facial recognition tool. But police noticed that, in their minds at least, this potential suspect looked a little bit like Woody Harrelson. So they put a photo of Woody Harrelson through the facial recognition tool to see what would come back. This comes from a study from Georgetown University's Center on Privacy and Technology called Garbage In, Garbage Out. And it's not the only example of police submitting questionable images to facial recognition tech. They've also submitted police artist sketches to see who they can get back, just as an example. So there are more issues with facial recognition technology than that, but that's kind of a little outline of some of the problems that we have with them. Now, you might be wondering whether EFF thinks that face recognition is inherently bad. The answer is no. This is a short demo from Apple's announcement of Face ID, which is the tool that Apple iPhones use to unlock your phone after taking a face print of your image. And then every time you turn the phone towards yourself, it determines whether that matches the face print, the image that it's seeing.
And here's how it works. Every time you glance at your iPhone 10, it detects your face with the flood illuminator, even in the dark. The IR camera takes an IR image. The dot projector projects out over 30,000 invisible IR dots. We use the IR image and the dot pattern, and we push them through neural networks to create a mathematical model of your face. And then we check that mathematical model against the one that we've stored that you set up earlier to see if it's a match and unlock your phone. And this all happens in real time. It all happens invisibly. You don't see these things going off.
So what makes face recognition good or bad? What makes it face recognition versus face surveillance? We've got a couple of simple guidelines. Can you opt out of its use? With the Apple iPhone Face ID, you don't have to use it. If it's using your image, was your image collected surreptitiously, or was your image collected with your consent? Again, with the Face ID example, your image was used with your consent, unless someone takes your phone and unlocks